President Trump in a high-stakes meeting today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as the delicate ceasefire in Gaza is holding, and Iran's president says his country is in a full-scale war with the U.S. and Israel. The tension between the three countries has been simmering after the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities over the summer.
Now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again, and if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them.
It's not clear what President Trump was directly referring to. Trump and Netanyahu speaking to reporters at Mar-a-Lago ahead of their meeting today. Iran's president claims the U.S., Israel, and Europe do not want Iran to stand on its feet.
I heard Iran wants to make a deal. If they want to make a deal, that's much smarter.
Trump says he plans to discuss 5 major topics with Netanyahu, including the ceasefire in Gaza. It's broadly holding, still in the first of 3 proposed phases. Details of that second phase have not yet been agreed to. Trump says he wants to move to that second phase as quickly as possible.
There has to be a disarming of Hamas.
Before meeting with Trump, Netanyahu sitting down with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Netanyahu praising Trump.
I think Israel is very blessed to have President Trump leading the United States, and I'll say leading the free world at this time.
Tonight, a warning is issued, not quietly, not diplomatically, but directly. And it's aimed at 2 of the most volatile forces in the Middle East. Hamas is told to disarm or face consequences. No timeline, no room for negotiation. Iran is warned just as bluntly, rebuild your weapons and risk another U.S. strike. These are not campaign rally words. They came after a closed-door meeting between Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, held not in Washington, but at Trump's private residence in Florida. Behind the cameras, the conversation centered on Gaza, the stalled ceasefire, Iran's military ambitions, and what comes next if diplomacy fails. Publicly, the language was sharp. Privately, the stakes were enormous, because this wasn't just about Israel and Hamas, and it wasn't just about Iran. It was about deterrence, power, and whether the region is moving toward stability or another round of escalation. What exactly was agreed behind those doors? What was deliberately left unsaid? And why are regional tensions rising instead of cooling? Stay with us. This isn't just another headline. This could shape what happens next, not only in the Middle East, but far beyond it. This is Global Affairs Report, where we break down today's political developments without the shouting, without speculation, and without spin. Here, we rely on publicly available reporting from established international newsrooms, government statements, and verified sources. Then add the context many headlines leave out. No talking points, no social media outrage cycles. Just what happened, why it matters, and how it could affect global stability. Every story is placed in its broader geopolitical frame, so you understand not just today's news, but the direction things are moving. If you value calm, fact-based analysis of international affairs, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this reporting reach more people, and it ensures you don't miss future updates as these events continue to unfold. Now, let's break down exactly what happened and why this meeting is drawing so much international attention. Here's what we're covering tonight and why each piece matters. First, Donald Trump hosted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago in Florida as pressure builds around the Gaza ceasefire and what comes next. Second, Trump issued a public warning to Hamas, saying the group must disarm and suggesting there will be serious consequences if it doesn't. Third, Trump also warned Iran, saying the United States could support another strike if Tehran resumes rebuilding its nuclear program or ballistic missile capabilities. Comments delivered while standing beside Netanyahu. Fourth, Iran's president responded publicly, warning that any attack on Iran would be met with a harsh response, a signal that tensions with Tehran are not cooling down. And fifth, there's a major political subplot. Trump claimed a pardon for Netanyahu was on its way, but the office of Israeli President Isaac Herzog disputed that claim, saying the matter is still under normal legal review. So tonight, we're not just looking at what was said, we're looking at what it signals. Because when leaders use language like this in public, it usually means something is happening behind the scenes. And later in the show, we'll get into the key question. Was this meeting designed to prevent a new escalation or prepare for one? Stay with us. Let's start with what actually happened. Chapter 1. Trump hosts Netanyahu. What happened and why it matters. Donald Trump welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to his private residence in Florida. The meeting took place away from Washington, away from formal diplomatic settings, but it immediately drew global attention. According to public reporting, the central focus was Gaza, specifically the ceasefire, and why it has stalled. Since October, a fragile ceasefire has been held in parts of Gaza, but the next phase, often referred to as Phase 2, has struggled to move forward. That second phase hinges on a core demand: Hamas disarming. And this is where the tone of the meeting became unmistakably clear. After the talks, Trump publicly warned Hamas that it must lay down its weapons, or in his words, there will be hell to pay. It was one of the strongest public statements made on the issue since the ceasefire began. No details were offered on how disarmament would happen, no explanation of who would oversee it, just a warning and a consequence. At the same time, Trump expanded the message beyond Gaza. He issued a separate warning to Iran, saying Tehran must not resume rebuilding its nuclear or ballistic missile capabilities. And he hinted that the United States could act again if it does. These remarks came as regional tensions remain high, and as Iran continues to deny pursuing nuclear weapons while insisting it will respond forcefully to any attack. For Netanyahu, the meeting served multiple purposes. Publicly, he praised Trump's past support for Israel's security. He spoke about shared strategy and, notably, awarded Trump symbolic recognition for his role in backing Israel. Privately, Netanyahu is under pressure. The Gaza conflict remains unresolved, international criticism continues, and the ceasefire, while holding for now, is far from secure. This Florida summit came at a critical moment after weeks of slowed negotiations, rising rhetoric, and growing uncertainty. But here's what wasn't addressed publicly. There was no detailed plan for how Hamas would be disarmed, no explanation of whether international forces would be involved, no clear response from Arab states, many of whom have warned that forced disarmament could trigger wider instability, and no timeline. Which raises the key question: was this meeting about enforcing peace, or about setting red lines before escalation? Because when warnings replace diplomacy, the margin for error shrinks. What happens next could take several paths: more pressure, diplomatic and economic, on Hamas, increased posturing toward Iran, or a return to confrontation if talks collapse. For now, what's clear is this: the language has hardened, the patience is thinning, and the region is once again standing at a crossroads. Chapter 2: Iran's reaction and wider regional impact. While Gaza dominated much of the discussion in Florida, Iran was never far from the conversation. In the days surrounding the meeting with Netanyahu, Donald Trump doubled down on his warning to Tehran. He made it clear that the United States would not tolerate Iran rebuilding its nuclear or ballistic missile capabilities, and suggested that military action remains an option. That message did not go unanswered. Iranian officials responded publicly, warning that any attack on Iran would be met with what they described as a harsh and costly response. The message was firm, and it was aimed not just at Washington, but at the wider region. This exchange matters because it follows a familiar and dangerous pattern. Iran continues to insist it is not seeking nuclear weapons. At the same time, Western governments remain skeptical, pointing to Iran's enrichment activities and missile development. And when rhetoric escalates on both sides, allies and proxies begin to move. Iran does not operate in isolation. Its influence stretches through allied groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, groups that have in the past responded to pressure on Tehran by escalating regional activity. This isn't theoretical. Earlier this year, limited U.S. strikes and counterstrikes triggered waves of tension across the region, from the Red Sea to southern Lebanon. Those confrontations did not spiral into full war, but they came close. What's different now is the timing. The Gaza ceasefire remains fragile. Israel's northern border is tense, and U.S. warnings are being delivered more publicly and more bluntly than before. That combination increases the risk of miscalculation, because even if Washington and Tehran avoid direct conflict, proxy escalation can happen quickly and unpredictably. A strike in Syria, a clash in southern Lebanon, an incident in the Gulf. Each one carries the potential to widen the conflict far beyond its original trigger. For now, both sides are signaling strength rather than compromise. And history shows that when diplomacy gives way to deterrence alone, the region becomes far less stable, not more. Recap, let's pause for a moment and reset. So far, we've seen Donald Trump host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Florida, with talks focused on the stalled Gaza ceasefire and the demand that Hamas disarm. We've heard Trump issue a direct warning to Hamas and a separate, equally firm warning to Iran, cautioning against rebuilding nuclear or missile capabilities. And we've seen Iran respond publicly, saying any attack would bring serious consequences, raising concerns about wider regional fallout. These statements, taken together, mark a shift toward harder language at a time when the region is already under strain. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Do you think these warnings will actually prevent further conflict, or do they make escalation more likely? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value calm, in-depth analysis of Middle East diplomacy and global power politics, drop a like on the video. Chapter 3: Ceasefire Implementation and Gaza Peace Process. As leaders exchange warnings and red lines, the situation on the ground in Gaza remains unresolved. The core problem is the ceasefire itself, specifically Phase 2. According to public reporting, the first phase of the ceasefire reduced large-scale fighting, but the second phase, which is meant to move toward longer-term stability, has stalled. At the center of that deadlock is a single demand. Israel insists that Hamas must disarm before further steps can be taken. Hamas, in turn, has rejected that demand outright, arguing that disarmament without broader political guarantees is unacceptable. This standoff has frozen progress. Without Phase 2, reconstruction remains limited. Aid delivery continues, but at a slower pace than humanitarian groups say is needed. And long-term planning for Gaza's future remains on hold. For civilians, the consequences are immediate. Housing reconstruction is delayed. Infrastructure repairs are slow, and daily life remains defined by uncertainty and dependency on emergency assistance. Diplomatically, the stalemate has widened divisions. Israel's government frames disarmament as a non-negotiable security requirement. Many international actors, including humanitarian organizations and some regional governments, argue that forcing disarmament without a political roadmap risks prolonging instability. This tension has produced two competing priorities. On one side, security first. On the other, humanitarian relief and political inclusion. Both sides say they are acting to prevent future violence, but neither side has bridged the gap between those positions. And as negotiations stall, time becomes a factor. The longer Phase 2 remains frozen, the harder it becomes to turn a ceasefire into a durable peace, and the easier it becomes for tensions to rise again. For now, Gaza remains caught between diplomacy that isn't moving and realities on the ground that can't wait. Chapter 4: Political Analysis. To understand why this moment feels so tense, we need to step back. The conflict in Gaza has followed a familiar pattern for decades. Periods of intense fighting are followed by ceasefires. Those ceasefires reduce violence, but rarely resolve the underlying issues. Historically, many agreements have failed because they address symptoms, not structures. Weapons were paused, not removed. Political questions were delayed, not settled. As a result, each ceasefire carried the seeds of the next confrontation. This is why Gaza wars have recurred, and why long-term peace has proven so elusive. Now, layer that history onto the US-Israel relationship. For decades, the United States has been Israel's strongest ally, providing military support, diplomatic backing, and security cooperation. At the same time, US administrations have often tried to balance that support with strategic restraint, urging de-escalation to avoid regional war. That balance has never been easy. Some moments lean heavily toward unconditional support. Others emphasize caution, diplomacy, and international coordination. What we're seeing now reflects that tension once again. Domestic politics play a major role here. In the United States, foreign policy language often hardens during election cycles. Leaders signal strength, clarity, and resolve, especially on national security. In Israel, internal political pressures are intense. Coalition politics, public opinion, and ongoing security threats all shape how leaders approach negotiations. These domestic forces don't stay domestic. They influence how red lines are drawn, how warnings are delivered, and how much flexibility leaders believe they can afford. So what does this tell us? It tells us that peace efforts in the Middle East are not shaped by one meeting, one ceasefire, or one warning. They're shaped by history, by alliances, by internal political realities that often limit compromise. And it tells us something else. When rhetoric grows sharper while trust remains low, diplomacy becomes harder, not easier. The challenge ahead is not just ending the next round of violence, it's breaking a cycle that has repeated for generations. Whether that happens will depend on what follows these warnings, not just what was said. Chapter 5, Rapid News Update. We're going to move quickly now through several key updates connected to tonight's story. First, Iran's nuclear position. Iranian officials have again publicly stated that the country is not seeking nuclear weapons, repeating a long-standing claim even as tensions with the United States remain high. The statement comes amid renewed warnings from Washington and continued international skepticism. Second, Netanyahu's public tone. During his meeting with Donald Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu openly praised Trump for what he described as strong support for Israel's security. The language was warm, symbolic, and highly visible, signaling political alignment at a sensitive moment. Third, ceasefire progress. Reporting indicates that negotiations around the Gaza ceasefire continue to slow, with political disagreements preventing movement into the next phase. While large-scale fighting has eased, long-term arrangements remain unresolved. Fourth, wider regional talks. According to public reporting, discussions during the Florida meeting also touched on Syria and Hezbollah, two issues closely tied to Iran's regional influence. No formal announcements were made, but their inclusion underscores how interconnected these conflicts have become. And finally, U.S. domestic politics. Alongside foreign policy developments, Donald Trump continues to face ongoing legal and political headlines at home, a backdrop that inevitably shapes how his statements and meetings are interpreted internationally. Taken together, these updates show how closely diplomacy, security, and domestic politics are now intertwined, both in the United States and across the Middle East. Final commentary. As this day comes to a close, one thing is clear. The meeting in Florida was more than symbolic. It may help shape the direction of the Middle East well into 2026. Not because a deal was announced, but because of the language that was used, the warnings that were issued, and the lines that were drawn. What happens next is still uncertain. Will Hamas choose to disarm or respond with defiance and escalation? That decision alone could determine whether the ceasefire holds or collapses. Will Iran pursue diplomacy to ease pressure or continue military and missile development despite warnings? And will the second phase of the Gaza peace plan finally move forward or quietly fall apart under the weight of political disagreement? These questions matter beyond Gaza. They affect regional stability across the Middle East. They influence global energy markets already sensitive to disruption, and they shape alliances, determining which countries cooperate, which hedge, and which prepare for confrontation. History shows that moments like this often look quiet on the surface, until suddenly they aren't. Whether this meeting leads to restraint or renewed conflict will depend not on rhetoric, but on what leaders do next, and what compromises they're willing to make. For now, the region waits, and the rest of the world watches closely. Thanks for watching. We'll continue tracking these developments closely and bring you updates as they unfold, using verified reporting and clear context without the noise. If you want to stay informed on global politics, diplomacy, and power dynamics, consider subscribing to the channel. And in our next episode, we'll take a closer look at how Gulf states are responding behind the scenes, and what their quiet diplomacy could mean for the region. Until then, stay informed.